Tonight, you drift north into a land of frost, silence, and whispers, where even Vikings lowered their voices and checked the dark twice. You walk into the cold before you realize you're walking at all. The ground crunches softly beneath your boots, a sound that feels too loud for a place like this, so you slow your steps, instinctively, the way people do when entering a library, a church, or someone else's nightmare. The air is thin, clean, and sharp enough to wake you, though you're here for the opposite. Pines stand tall and unmoving, their branches heavy with snow, like old men holding secrets they've grown tired of telling. Somewhere far off, ice creaks, not cracks, creaks. It stretches and complains the way an ancient house does at night. You're in the far north now, not the romantic north of postcards and Instagram filters. This is the north that teaches silence. And here's a gentle warning before we go any further. You probably won't make it through this night, at least not awake. If you're new here, feel free to like and subscribe, softly, politely, as if tapping a sleeping bear on the shoulder. And if you're comfortable, leave a comment with your location and local time. It's strangely comforting to know where everyone is drifting off from. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You are not a Viking, not yet, but you can hear them. The low murmur of men gathered around a fire behind you. Broad shoulders wrapped in wool and fur. Beards stiff with frost. Hands scarred from iron, rope, and salt water. These are men who have crossed seas that swallowed others whole. Men who burned villages without blinking. Men who laughed while sharpening axes. And yet, listen closely, they're uneasy. A Viking ship rests nearby, pulled up on frozen ground like a long, tired animal. Its carved prow stares into the dark forest ahead. No one is eager to go in that direction. The fire pops. Someone spits into the snow. Another man mutters a word that does not sound like Old Norse, but everyone understands it. Finner. The Sami. This is the major historical fact you carry with you tonight. The Vikings feared the Sami people, often called Finns in medieval Norse sources, not for their strength, but for their magic. The sagas don't say this loudly. Vikings never liked admitting fear, but they circle around it. They hesitate. They add warnings. They lower their voices when Sami lands come up, the way people do when discussing bad roads or worse neighbors. You move closer to the fire, feeling the warmth on your shins. Someone is telling a story now, slow and careful, about a trader who hired a Sami guide and never came back the same. About winds that turned against ships for no reason. About arrows that came out of fog and vanished with the shooter. The Vikings called this magic seer, a strange, unsettling kind of power. And here's the weird cultural tidbit for the night. Norsemen believed Sami shamans could sell favorable winds in knots of rope. You untied a knot at sea, and a breeze would come. Untied another, stronger wind. Untied the third, and congratulations, you've purchased a storm. It sounds ridiculous. It also appears in multiple medieval sources, which suggests people believed it hard enough to repeat it, write it down, and warn others. Even tough men will pay for nonsense if they think it works. Modern humans still do this. We just call it supplements. You glance toward the forest again. It doesn't look threatening. That's part of the problem. Historians still debate whether the Vikings truly believed in Sami magic, or whether fear was amplified by cultural misunderstanding and unfamiliar ritual. But belief or not, behavior tells the story. Vikings avoided conflict here when they could. A man beside you adjusts his cloak. He smells of smoke and damp wool. He says quietly that Sami arrows never miss, that their drums speak, that they can curse a man so his luck simply leaves him. You look down at your hands. They feel steady, normal, human. You don't feel cursed. Yet, somewhere deeper in the forest, a sound echoes. Not a howl, not a shout, something between. The men fall silent. Even the fire seems to listen. Remember the ship behind you? It suddenly feels very far away. And as you stand there, wrapped in borrowed fear and borrowed history, you begin to understand something quietly important. The most terrifying thing to a Viking wasn't death. It was losing control. And here, in Samiland, control had a habit of slipping away. You don't sleep well that night. No one does. The fire burns low, and you lie on your side, wrapped in furs that smell faintly of salt and old journeys. The ground is hard beneath you, but exhaustion smooths its edges. Your breath fogs the air in small, patient clouds. Somewhere nearby, a man snores, then stops abruptly, as if even his dreams told him to be quiet. When dawn comes, it arrives without ceremony. No golden light, just a pale, exhausted gray that slowly reveals the world again, like someone reluctantly turning the lights back on. The forest is still there, unchanged, watching. You rise with the others, boots on, belts tightened, weapons checked, not aggressively, but with a kind of polite readiness. The Vikings are moving inland today, trading rather than raiding. Silver, cloth, and iron tools will be offered. Furs, reindeer products, and guidance through the land will be requested. This is another key historical fact, slipped gently into your pocket. The Vikings depended heavily on trade with the Sami for furs and northern resources. They feared them, yes, but they also needed them. History is full of this awkward combination. As you walk, snow crunches rhythmically beneath your steps. Trees thin out, and the land opens into a wide, quiet expanse. And then you see them. The Sami camp does not announce itself. No walls. No smoke columns reaching for attention. Just low structures, tents shaped like cones, nestled into the land rather than imposed upon it. Reindeer stand nearby, calm and unbothered, as if they belong more to the earth than to people. A figure approaches. They are not large, not armored, no axe slung over the shoulder. And yet the Vikings slow. Someone clears his throat unnecessarily. Another man adjusts his grip on a spear he hopes not to use. The Sami person wears layered clothing of hide and wool, decorated subtly, not for show but for meaning. Their eyes meet yours briefly, and then slide away, not afraid, simply uninterested in staring. Here's the obscure detail that history left us, tucked between serious observations. Sami shamans, known as Noaidi, use drums painted with symbols to enter trance states. The drum was both map and message, a universe you could tap rhythm into motion. One of the Vikings whispers that the drums can find lost souls. Another says they can steal them. A third shrugs, the universal gesture of someone pretending not to care. You notice something important now. The Sami are relaxed. Not lazy, not careless, just at ease. Their movements are efficient, unhurried, like people who know the land will still be there tomorrow. The Vikings, for all their confidence, always seem to be pushing against something. Time, fate, gods with complicated personalities. Trade begins. Silver glints softly in gray light. Furs are examined, stroked, admired. Words are exchanged through gestures and shared terms. No shouting, no boasting. And yet the tension never fully leaves. A drum rests against one tent. No one touches it. No one jokes about it. The Vikings give it space the way people do with unexploded objects or very quiet dogs. You feel it then, not fear exactly, but humility. A sense that strength wears many shapes, and not all of them swing swords. A Sami elder looks toward the sky, then toward the forest, then back to the traders. A decision has been made. Wind shifts slightly. A Viking ship, far behind you, creaks in response. Coincidence? Maybe. Historians still debate how much of this perceived terror was myth layered onto cultural distance. But myths have weight, and weight shapes behavior. As the trade concludes, no one lingers. Polite nods. Careful distance. The Vikings begin the journey back. Quicker now. Eager for familiar water and predictable dangers. You follow them, glancing once over your shoulder. The Sami camp is already dissolving back into the landscape, as if it was never fully separate from it at all. And for the first time, you realize the Vikings weren't afraid of being killed here. They were afraid of being outmatched in a way they didn't understand. The forest closes in gently behind you. The ship awaits, and the north keeps its secrets. Warm, quiet, and very much awake. You're back on the ship now, though it doesn't feel like safety so much as familiarity. The longboat rocks gently, not enough to alarm you, just enough to remind your bones that they're floating on something that doesn't care about plans. The sail hangs slack. The oars rest. No one is in a hurry to leave, but no one suggests staying either. The north has that effect. Presses silence into conversation. As the shoreline drifts slowly away, someone finally speaks. A low voice, casual, almost bored. That's how Viking fear often sounds. Disguised as indifference, the emotional equivalent of shrugging at a thunderstorm. You sit among them, wrapped in furs again, watching the land recede. Pines blur into a single dark line. Snow smooths everything into abstraction. If fear had a texture, it would look like this landscape, soft, endless, quietly swallowing detail. The man across from you starts telling a story. He pretends it's funny. He even smiles once, briefly, like someone testing ice with their foot. He says there was a jarl once who thought the stories about the Sami were exaggerated. Thought fear was for poets and old women. He sailed north, demanded tribute instead of trade, made threats, laughed. The wind changed that night. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It just refused to cooperate. The oars felt heavier. The sail pulled the wrong way. The stars blurred. When they returned home weeks later, fewer men, thinner faces, the jarl never laughed again. Here's the major historical fact drifting in with the tide. Medieval Norse sources describe Sami magic as capable of influencing weather, luck, and fate, particularly at sea. Whether metaphor or belief, Vikings behaved as if this were true. And behavior, inconveniently, is evidence. The man finishes his story by shrugging. Someone chuckles. Another man stares at the water. No one says the obvious thing out loud. Sailors who believe the sea can be cursed sail very carefully. You lean over the side and watch dark water slide past the hull. It's hypnotic. You could watch it forever, or at least until you forget why you were tense in the first place. That's when you notice something odd. A bundle of rope sits near the mast. Ordinary rope. Coarse, salt-stained, tied into several neat knots. Someone notices you looking. "Oh," he says, "bought wind." He says it like he's explaining where he got bread. This is the obscure detail that sneaks up on you. Vikings sometimes carried wind knots purchased from Sami traders, believing them to control breezes at sea. The knots are tight, deliberate. No one unties them casually. You don't fiddle with magic you've paid for. That would be rude. The ship creaks. The sail flutters slightly, just enough to suggest cooperation. You think about how modern people still do this, hedging bets with superstition. Lucky socks, ritual coffee mugs, Weather apps checked compulsively even when you're already wet. Different tools. Same brain. The shoreline is gone now. Only water and sky remain. The men relax incrementally, like animals moving out of a predator's territory. Shoulders lower. Conversation resumes, cautiously. Someone jokes that at least Sami don't raid monasteries. Someone else replies that monks probably don't sell storms. That's joke one. Dry. Sleepy. Another man adds that if magic were real, everyone would use it. He says this while sitting on a ship powered by belief, wood, and prayers to gods who routinely ruin lives for character development. That's joke two. The third joke never quite forms. It dies somewhere between thought and speech, which feels appropriate. As the ship glides southward, you feel something loosen inside you. Not relief exactly, more like distance, the kind that makes fear manageable, portable. Historians still debate whether Viking fear of the Sami was exaggerated by saga writers, but exaggeration itself reveals anxiety. You don't exaggerate what doesn't bother you. The sun dips low, staining the water amber. Someone starts humming. A work song slowed to half speed. The sound vibrates through the planks, through you. You close your eyes briefly. When you open them again, land appears on the horizon. Familiar land. And for the first time, you realize something unsettling. The Vikings didn't fear the Sami because they were weak. They feared them because they were outside the rules. And Vikings hated not knowing the rules. Time passes in that peculiar medieval way, measured less by clocks and more by meals, weather, and who's still alive. You travel south with the crew, stopping at settlements that feel louder now, brighter, almost obnoxiously confident. People here brag again. They argue. They boast about raids, gods, lineage. Someone throws an axe at a tree for no reason other than proving they can. It all feels noisy. You notice how often the Sami come up in conversation now. Always indirectly. Always as an aside. A warning folded into a joke. A story told about someone else. This is another solid historical anchor to rest against. Norse sagas consistently portray Sami lands as dangerous, mysterious, and spiritually charged, distinct from ordinary enemy territory. They're not framed as rivals. They're framed as variables. You sit near a hearth one night as a skald tells a story. Firelight dances across carved beams. Shadows stretch and shrink like living things. The skald's voice rises and falls, practiced, soothing. He speaks of gods, of fate, of men who try to cheat destiny and fail spectacularly. And then, woven gently into the tale, a Sami figure appears, not as a villain, but as a catalyst. Someone who knows. The room grows quieter. This is the weird cultural tidbit slipping into the cracks. Some Norse myths suggest Odin himself learned magic seer from outside cultures, possibly influenced by Sami practices. Which is ironic because Vikings mocked male magic users, except when their chief god did it. Hypocrisy, like fire, keeps humanity warm. You glance around. People listen closely now. The story touches something raw. Magic isn't just frightening, it's embarrassing. It blurs gender rules, social rules, power structures, and Vikings loved rules almost as much as they loved breaking them. A man near you mutters that magic makes warriors soft. Another man points out that dying because you ignored magic makes you dead. That's joke one. Later, someone asks if Sami children are born knowing spells. The question is half serious. The answer is a shrug. No one knows. That's worse. That's joke two, hiding inside uncertainty. Outside, the wind picks up. Smoke curls strangely. Someone adjusts the door. You think back to the forest. the quiet, the way the land didn't need permission. Historians still debate how much interaction occurred between Norse and Sami belief systems, but overlap exists, and overlap makes people uncomfortable. It suggests influence, contamination, change. Change is terrifying to cultures built on tradition and reputation. As the night deepens, you feel yourself slowing. The hearth crackles. The skald's voice softens. Words blur gently at the edges. You realize that fear, when repeated often enough, becomes story. Story becomes myth. Myth becomes truth you don't question anymore. And somewhere in that process, the Sami stopped being people and became something else, an idea, a boundary, a reminder that the world contained forces Vikings couldn't conquer with axes alone. Your eyelids grow heavy, the fire dims, and just before sleep takes you, one thought drifts through, unhurried and oddly comforting. The scariest thing in the world to a conqueror is a neighbor who doesn't want what you're selling. You wake to the sound of law being spoken. It's not shouted. That would be too dramatic. This is law the Viking way, measured, formal, spoken aloud so it can exist in the world and lodge itself into memory. You sit on a low bench near the edge of a thing assembly, the ing, where men gather to argue, settle disputes, and pretend that words are less dangerous than weapons. The air smells of damp grass and smoke. Someone nearby chews thoughtfully on dried fish, which feels like a strong choice for a legal proceeding, but no one comments. Vikings are nothing if not consistent. A case is being discussed. Land rights, trade disagreements, and then, inevitably, the North comes up. Not directly, never directly. A man claims his trading party was delayed. Another suggests foul weather. A third mutters that the delay occurred near Sami territory, and the crowd responds with a low, collective sound that lands somewhere between acknowledgement and discomfort. This is your major historical fact for the section, unfolding slowly like a legal scroll. Medieval Scandinavian law codes sometimes reference Sami people as distinct and dangerous, regulating trade and contact rather than encouraging conquest. You notice something important. No one proposes marching north. No one suggests punishment. The law doesn't reach that far, and everyone seems fine with that. The Vikings believed law brought order. Order brought safety. But the Sami existed outside this system, governed by customs that didn't require assemblies, oaths on rings, or loud men reciting ancestry. You shift your weight, listening as the law speaker drones on. His voice is soothing in the way only bureaucratic ritual can be. You could fall asleep to this. Many probably do. Justice, after all, moves slowly. Someone jokes that it's easier to fight an enemy than negotiate with weather. That's joke one. Another adds that at least storms don't demand silver. Joke two. A third mutters that storms also don't curse your grandchildren. No one laughs. Joke three fails quietly, which is the most Viking outcome possible. Here's the obscure cultural tidbit slipping into the moment. Norsemen believed curses could travel through generations, especially those placed by skilled magic users. Nothing motivates good behavior like the threat of your great-grandson having inexplicably bad luck. You glance at the faces around you. These are practical people. Farmers, sailors, traders. They don't want metaphysical problems. They want predictable harvests and calm seas. Historians still debate whether Viking restraint toward the Sami was driven by belief, economics, or mutual benefit, but restraint itself is the anomaly. Vikings restrained themselves almost nowhere else. The law speaker concludes. The crowd disperses slowly, conversations resuming in lower, safer tones. You stand, stretch, and feel how the tension drains once the North is no longer being discussed. Fear, you realize, is manageable when it's codified. You walk away from the assembly toward a familiar path. Remember the hearth from earlier? The one where stories blurred into firelight? It's back now, metaphorically speaking. People gather. Night approaches. And once again, the Sami drift into conversation like fog. Never seen directly, always felt. Night settles in layers. First comes the cold, then the quiet, then the stars, sharp, numerous, unapologetic. You lie back near the fire, staring upward, watching constellations you don't know trace paths across the sky. Vikings name them differently. Stories attach where science hasn't yet bothered to arrive. Someone beside you points at the stars and says the Sami know their paths better than anyone. Someone else replies that the Sami don't need stars, they talk to spirits. This is said with half a smile, half a wince. This brings us gently to the major historical fact resting under tonight's sky. Sami navigational knowledge of the Arctic land, seasons, and migration far exceeded that of most Norse settlers. Knowledge is power. Quiet knowledge is unsettling power. A drum sits nearby. Not a Sami drum, just a skin stretched for music. But the shape alone draws attention. Someone taps it experimentally. The sound is hollow. Everyone flinches just a little. The man laughs and stops. Modern equivalent. Accidentally playing spooky music in an empty house at night. Your brain fills in the rest. Here's the weird cultural tidbit drifting in on the cold air. Some Norse believed Sami shamans could send their spirits out of their bodies to travel vast distances. Astral projection, medieval edition. No user manual included. You pull your cloak tighter and listen as an older man speaks. He says that once, a Sami Noaidi fell into a trance and described events happening miles away. He pauses, says he doesn't know if it was true, says it felt true. Historians still debate whether trance rituals were misunderstood spiritual practices or exaggerated into myth, but misunderstanding is fertile ground for fear, especially when people don't bother correcting it. The fire crackles. Someone yawns. Another man mutters that if spirits can travel, at least they don't need ships. That's joke one. Someone else adds that spirits probably don't get seasick. Joke two. A third says spirits also don't drown, which feels unfair. Joke three lands softly. Your eyelids grow heavy. The stars blur slightly. The conversation drifts from magic to weather to nothing at all. Silence expands. Not empty, just full of breathing and shared warmth. You think again of the Sami, not as specters or sorcerers, but as people living in rhythm with a place that demands respect. They didn't terrify Vikings with weapons. They terrified them with competence, with knowledge that couldn't be stolen easily, with traditions that didn't bend to conquest, with a world that didn't care who thought they were strongest. Sleep takes you slowly now, and just before you drift fully under, one last thought settles in, gentle and unthreatening. The North didn't need to be conquered. It only needed to be understood. You wake to bells. Not church bells. Not yet. Not here. But the soft clink of metal against metal as someone adjusts tack on a reindeer harness. The sound is delicate, almost polite, the opposite of the crashing horns and shouting you've grown used to. For a moment, still half asleep, you're not sure whose camp you're in. Then you remember. The North again. This time you're closer. Close enough that the cold doesn't feel like an enemy anymore. Just a fact. You breathe it in. It smells clean, empty, and oddly calming, like the world before it learned how to rush. You're traveling with a small group now. Not raiders. Not traders in bulk. These are intermediaries. Men who know when to speak and when to stay silent. They walk carefully, not out of fear, but etiquette. The land feels occupied, not owned. Occupied in the way a home is occupied by habits, memory, and expectation. Here's the major historical fact moving quietly alongside you. Vikings rarely attempted to convert or forcibly dominate the Sami before Christianization, treating their spiritual practices with cautious distance. That alone should tell you something. Vikings converted others with swords. Here they didn't try. You crest a low ridge and see the camp below. Tents arranged to break wind. Reindeer grazing calmly. Bells chiming softly as they move. Smoke rising thin and controlled, like it knows better than to attract attention. A Sami woman kneels near a fire, hands steady as she works sinew through leather. Her movements are economical, practiced. No wasted motion. She doesn't look up as you pass, not because she's afraid, but because she doesn't need to. You feel suddenly loud just by existing. The men with you lower their voices. Not intentionally. It just happens. Someone whispers that the gods are stronger here. Someone else mutters that maybe the gods just listen better. That's joke one barely. The weird cultural tidbit glides in softly here. Sami belief systems were deeply animistic, seeing spirits in animals, landscapes, and even weather patterns. To people who already believed in angry gods, this wasn't strange. It was threateningly logical. A drum rests near the fire again. Painted symbols catch the light. Lines, circles, shapes that feel meaningful even if you don't know why. You resist the urge to stare. Feels rude. A Noaidi sits nearby. Older. Calm. Eyes half closed, as if already looking somewhere else. No one approaches him directly. Even the Vikings who pride themselves on bravery keep a respectful arc of space. Historians still debate whether Norse fear of Sami spirituality was rooted in respect or insecurity, but insecurity wears many disguises. The Noaidi taps the drum lightly. Once, twice. The sound settles into your chest like a second heartbeat. Someone near you mutters that he'd rather face a blade than a prayer. Joke 2 whispered. Another replies that prayers last longer. Joke 3 unanswered. You realize something slowly, comfortably. This place isn't hostile. It's indifferent. And indifference is far scarier to conquerors than hatred. Faith creeps in the way cold does. Gradually, then all at once. You don't notice the shift at first. Just small changes. Vikings crossing themselves differently. Murmured Christian prayers mixed awkwardly with older Norse ones. The world is changing, and everyone knows it, but no one has updated the instructions yet. A priest appears one evening, wrapped in wool that's never known a battlefield. He speaks softly about salvation, about one God instead of many, about light and darkness. The Vikings listen politely. They always do. They're good at listening without committing. Someone asks whether the Christian God is stronger in the north. The priest hesitates. That hesitation says more than any answer. Here's the major historical fact settling into place like frost. As Christianity spread through Scandinavia, Sami spiritual practices were increasingly demonized rather than respected. Fear doesn't disappear. It just changes costumes. You sit near the edge of the gathering, watching firelight reflect off metal crosses and old rune carvings alike. The mix is uneasy, transitional, like a house mid-renovation where no one remembers what the final design is supposed to be. The priest warns against drums, against spirits, against people who speak to the land instead of heaven. His voice is calm, practiced, convincing. A Viking nearby mutters that at least the Christian God doesn't sell weather. Joke 1. Another says he still hasn't fixed storms either. Joke 2. A third points out that priests don't seem eager to travel north. Joke 3 lands heavily. The obscure cultural tidbit slips in with the shadows. In later centuries, Sami drums were confiscated and destroyed, viewed as tools of sorcery. You can't destroy fear without first believing in it. You glance northward again. Even from here, you feel it, the quiet pull of a place that refuses to fit neatly into doctrine. The Sami didn't need to argue theology. Their beliefs were lived, not preached. Historians still debate whether Christianization intensified Viking fear of the Sami or merely reframed it, but the result was the same. Mystery became menace. The fire burns low. The priest leaves. Conversations resume, quieter now. The world feels less certain, more brittle. You lean back, eyes heavy, and understand something gently profound. The Vikings weren't afraid of the Sami because they worshipped different gods. They were afraid because the Sami didn't need Viking gods at all. Sleep settles in again, slow and inevitable. Time stretches, not dramatically, just enough that you stop noticing it move. You are older now, or maybe the world is. The Viking Age is no longer sharp-edged and urgent. It has begun to soften around the corners, like a well-handled tool. Raids still happen. Ships still sail. But the stories have changed. They linger longer on the strange than the glorious. You sit in a longhouse, warmed by a fire that has been rebuilt countless times in the same shallow pit. Smoke stains the beams above you. Every generation adds another layer, another memory. The house remembers more than the people inside it. Someone is telling a saga again. You've heard this one before. Everyone has. That's how you know it matters. It's about a Viking who travels north, not to raid, not to trade, but to prove something. Pride is a powerful fuel, especially when mixed with boredom. The man mocks the old warnings, laughs at drums, scoffs at wind knots. He doesn't die in the story. That would be too simple. Instead, he returns, wrong, quieter, thinner. His luck abandoned him like a bad investment. His crops fail. His ship breaks at sea. His sons quarrel and scatter. Nothing dramatic, just a long, gentle unraveling. That's the major historical fact settling in for this section. Norse sagas often depict encounters with Sami magic as slow, corrosive misfortune rather than immediate destruction. You notice how the room listens. No one interrupts. No one jokes. This kind of fear doesn't need embellishment. Here's the obscure, slightly unsettling cultural tidbit sliding under the door. In Norse belief, luck, hamingja, was a tangible force that could be lost, stolen, or damaged. The worst curse wasn't death, it was persistent failure. A man near you mutters that he'd rather anger a king than lose his luck. Someone else nods gravely. This feels reasonable. That's joke 1, disguised as sincerity. Another man adds that luck is like a boat. You don't notice it until it leaks. Joke 2. A third says his luck ran away years ago and never wrote. Joke 3 lands softly, tired and familiar. Outside, snow begins to fall. Thick flakes. Slow. The kind that muffles sound and softens edges. The saga continues, describing the North as a place that doesn't chase you, but waits. Historians still debate whether these stories reflect real intercultural fear or symbolic storytelling, but symbols endure longer than facts. They stick where numbers slide off. You find yourself thinking less about the Sami as people and more about what they represent to Viking memory. A limit. A reminder that not everything bends to iron and confidence. The fire dims. The storyteller's voice lowers. Words blur into warmth. You don't remember falling asleep. You wake somewhere quieter. The longhouse is gone. The fire is gone. Even the snow feels distant now. Instead, you're standing at the edge of memory itself, where history thins and myth takes over the job of explanation. Centuries pass here without ceremony. The Vikings fade. Not suddenly. They don't disappear in a dramatic montage. They settle, convert, marry, argue about land instead of gods. Their ships rot slowly into the soil. Their stories linger longer than their bloodlines. And still, the Sami remain. This is the grounding historical truth for this section. Steady and unhurried. The Sami are the only indigenous people of Northern Europe to survive continuous external pressure without full cultural erasure. That endurance becomes the final source of fear, retroactive, quiet, undeniable. You walk through a later Scandinavian village now. Wooden churches stand where groves once did. Bells ring. Law is written down instead of remembered. The North is spoken of as empty, wild, available, but it isn't. Old warnings persist in different clothes. Stories told to children. Superstitions about certain hills, certain winds, certain people who know too much about weather. Here's the strange cultural echo that lingers. Even after Christianization, Northern Scandinavians continued attributing unexplained events to Sami influence. Magic doesn't vanish. It gets blamed. A priest warns against old beliefs. A farmer nods, then quietly avoids a familiar trail anyway. Faith changes faster than instincts. Historians still debate how much medieval fear shaped modern stereotypes. But fear, once inherited, rarely asks permission before staying. You pause at the edge of a forest again. It looks smaller now. Mapped, named, logged. And yet, something in you hesitates before entering. That's the final joke of the night, and it barely feels like one. Even when you stop believing in magic, your feet sometimes still remember it. The wind moves through the trees, not threatening, just present. You understand now. The Sami never terrified the Vikings with violence. They terrified them by proving that some knowledge couldn't be conquered. Some power couldn't be stolen. Some worlds didn't need Vikings at all. Your breathing slows. The forest stays where it is. And the fear, once sharp, now ancient, finally softens into something almost respectful. You begin to notice the silence first. Not the peaceful kind, the intentional kind. The kind that arrives after a story has been told too many times and then quietly put away. The North is still there, but people speak of it differently now. Less awe, more avoidance. A place mentioned only when necessary, like an old argument no one wants to reopen. You're walking through a later age. Not Viking anymore, not quite modern. Timber houses cluster closer together. Fields stretch farther into once untouched land. Trees fall in straight lines now, measured, claimed, accounted for. The people you pass no longer wear armor. They wear habits, tunics, expressions of quiet certainty. They believe they understand the world better now. And yet, they still lower their voices when Sami lands come up. Here is the major historical fact, resting quietly like a stone in your pocket. By the late medieval period, Scandinavian states increasingly asserted control over northern regions, but avoided full settlement deep into Sami territories for centuries. Conquest has limits, even bureaucratic conquest. You stop near a roadside shrine. A wooden cross leans slightly, weather-worn, its edges softened by time. Offerings rest at its base. Bread, a scrap of cloth, a carved token shaped like an animal. Not officially approved offerings. You glance around. No one is watching. No one ever is. This is the obscure cultural tidbit slipping through the cracks of doctrine. Folk Christianity in Scandinavia often blended older animistic practices well into the early modern period. God above, spirits everywhere else. Just in case. A traveler nearby mutters that it never hurts to be polite. You agree. That's joke one. Another adds that politeness has better odds than theology. Joke 2. A third says the North remembers insults. Joke 3 arrives softly and stays. You continue walking. Snow crunches underfoot again, but it feels thinner now. Managed. The land has been divided into parcels, taxed, recorded. And yet, reindeer paths still cut across borders without caring. Rivers ignore jurisdiction entirely. Historians still debate whether Sami resistance was intentional defiance or simply persistence, but persistence can look like rebellion to people who expect compliance. You hear a story told at an inn that night. A farmer lost cattle. Weather turned unexpectedly. He swears no one cursed him, but he also swears he won't complain again. The room nods in agreement. Wisdom has a way of surviving under different names. You lie down near the fire, eyes heavy, listening to it settle and wind press against walls that were never meant to keep it out completely. The North has grown quieter. Not safer, just quieter. Memory changes shape as it travels. You see it happening now. Stories flatten. Fear becomes folklore. Folklore becomes entertainment. What once made men hesitate now makes children giggle nervously before bedtime. You walk through a village where winter nights are long and storytelling fills the gaps. A grandmother speaks of people who can talk to animals, of drums that know the future, of winds that listen. She smiles while telling it. That's how you know the fear has softened. This is the historical anchor holding the moment steady. By the early modern period, Sami spiritual power was increasingly reframed as superstition rather than threat. The danger didn't disappear. It was downsized. Children ask whether the stories are real. The grandmother shrugs, says some things don't need to be real to be useful. You nod. That's wisdom that ages well. Here's the strange cultural echo still humming quietly. Even as belief faded, Northern Europeans continued attributing bad luck or strange weather to old Northern magic. Blame travels farther than belief. Someone jokes that at least magic is cheaper than priests now. Joke 1. Another says priests don't control the weather either. Joke 2. A third suggests they all secretly hope someone does. Joke 3 lands gently and dissolves. Outside, snow falls again. Always snow. Always patient. You watch it through a small window, each flake unique, anonymous, temporary. Historians still debate how much of the Viking fear survived into later centuries, but the evidence is subtle, written into behavior rather than records. Into paths not taken, lands not settled, stories told carefully. You feel yourself slowing further now, breathing deeper, the world blurring at the edges, not from confusion, but comfort. You understand something quietly profound. Fear doesn't vanish when it's disproven. It fades when it's no longer needed. The North no longer needs to terrify anyone. Simply exists, and as you drift closer to sleep, you realize that the Sami never set out to frighten the Vikings at all. They just refused to disappear. You're far from the age of axes now. No longships creak at the shore. No shields line the walls. The world has grown quieter in a different way, less wild, more regulated. Paper has replaced memory. Ink has replaced song. Maps have replaced hesitation. You walk along a northern road that didn't exist when the Vikings were afraid. It cuts through land once avoided, now measured carefully with straight lines and official names. Snow still falls, but it feels thinner somehow, as if it knows it's being watched. A man passes you on horseback, carrying documents instead of weapons. He nods politely. He believes the land belongs to someone now. That belief is doing a lot of work. Here's the major historical fact easing into place. By the 17th century, Scandinavian states formally claimed Sami lands through taxation and administration rather than conquest. No battle, no heroic resistance, just paperwork. You stop near a boundary marker, wooden, weathered, official. It doesn't impress the reindeer grazing nearby. They step over invisible borders without apology. You admire their confidence. A local official explains that the Sami now pay taxes to multiple kingdoms at once, Norway, Sweden, sometimes Russia, depending on who shows up first. He laughs lightly, as if this is clever rather than cruel. That's joke one, whether he means it to be or not. The obscure cultural tidbit slips in quietly here. Sami families sometimes paid taxes in fish, furs, or crafted goods. Anything that fit the season. Currency bends when survival requires it. You notice how often officials talk about the Sami instead of to them. They're described as nomadic, unreliable, difficult to pin down. This is said with irritation, but also admiration. You can't tax what won't stay still. Historians still debate whether this administrative pressure was intentional marginalization or bureaucratic indifference, but indifference is often more damaging than hostility. You pass a small Sami settlement later that day. Temporary structures, reindeer skins, smoke rising thin and controlled. It looks much like it always has, just surrounded now by signs, borders, and assumptions. A child watches you pass. Curious, calm, unafraid. You realize something unsettling and oddly comforting. The Vikings feared the Sami because they couldn't control them. Later states feared them because they couldn't define them. Different fear. Same discomfort. As evening falls, you sit near a fire again because history loves symmetry. Someone nearby hums an old melody. Not Norse, not Christian. Something older, something patient. You feel sleep edging closer. Fear is no longer sharp here. It's administrative, and that somehow feels worse. The world keeps modernizing. It does this without asking permission. You drift forward again, carried not by ships or horses, but by decades stacking neatly on top of each other. Roads improve. Towns grow. Churches multiply. The North becomes quieter in official records and louder in extraction reports. You walk past a mine, then another. Smoke rises thicker here, darker. The land is being asked to give up things it once kept hidden. Here's the major historical fact settling heavily now. From the 18th century onward, Sami lands were increasingly exploited for resources, often without Sami consent. No magic stops this. No drum changes the wind. You feel the shift. This is where fear transforms again, not into respect, not into myth, but into dismissal. The Sami are no longer terrifying. They're inconvenient. A government official explains that progress requires sacrifice. He does not specify whose. That's joke one, and it's bitter. The obscure cultural tidbit drifts in like smoke. Despite pressure, Sami oral traditions preserved detailed ecological knowledge unmatched by industrial planners. The land still trusted them even if governments didn't. You stand at the edge of a forest that looks thinner than it should. Trees are spaced unnaturally. Quiet here feels hollow, not peaceful. Even the wind sounds unsure of itself. Someone nearby says the old stories were nonsense anyway. He laughs too loudly. That's joke too defensive. Another says you can't fear people who don't fight back. Joke 3 lands wrong and sits there uncomfortably. Historians still debate whether the loss of fear led to greater harm, but the pattern is painfully clear. When mystery disappears, exploitation accelerates. You think back to the Vikings, to their hesitation, to their respect dressed up as superstition. For all their violence, they sensed a boundary here. Later generations didn't. Night falls again. It always does. You watch lights flicker in distant settlements. Industry hums softly. The land listens, but it does not respond the way it once did. You feel tired now, not just sleepy, but historically tired. The kind of fatigue that comes from watching the same mistake change costumes. As you lie down, one last thought drifts through you, slow and heavy. The moment the Sami stopped terrifying anyone was the moment they became truly vulnerable. You don't notice erasure when it's happening. That's the trick of it. It doesn't arrive with fire or shouting or armies at the edge of the horizon. It comes with forms, with policies, with good intentions written in careful handwriting. It comes wearing the mild, reassuring face of improvement. You walk into a schoolhouse now, northern, plain, practical. The walls are bare except for a cross and a slate board. Children sit quietly at wooden desks, their boots lined up neatly by the door. They are very good at being still. Too good. The teacher speaks a language that is not theirs. Correctly, repeatedly, kindly. Mistakes are corrected gently, which somehow makes them heavier. A Sami child answers a question in her own tongue without thinking. The room freezes for half a second. The teacher sighs, not angrily, just tired. He explains again which language is allowed here. This is the major historical fact you carry with you now, solid and unavoidable. From the 19th century onward, Sami children were subjected to forced assimilation policies, particularly through schooling. No drums, no magic, no storms, just silence where words used to live. You sit at the back of the room, invisible as history often is when it doesn't want to intervene. You notice how the children's shoulders tense, not in fear, but in vigilance. They are learning something very efficiently, when not to speak. The obscure cultural tidbit slips in quietly, almost apologetically. Some Sami families hid traditional practices and languages for generations to protect their children. Survival sometimes looks like forgetting on purpose. Outside, the land hasn't changed much. Reindeer still move the same way. Snow still falls without consulting policy. But inside buildings like this, something essential thins. A man in a coat explains that this is progress. That shared language builds unity. That old ways hold people back. He says it earnestly. That's joke one, though no one laughs. Another official adds that traditions can be preserved in museums. Joke two, accidental but devastating. A third suggests the children will thank them later. Joke three doesn't land at all. It just sinks. Historians still debate whether these policies were driven by nationalism, ignorance, or economic convenience, but the outcome didn't bother debating back. It simply happened. You walk away from the schoolhouse slowly. The cold feels sharper now. Not bracing. Invasive. You think about the Vikings again. About their fear. About how they stepped lightly here, unsure, respectful in their own rough way. It wasn't kindness, but it wasn't this. Erasure is quieter than conquest. That's what makes it effective. As night comes, you sit by another fire, smaller, controlled, modern. Someone hums an old melody under their breath, barely audible. It's not meant to be heard. It's meant to survive. Resistance doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like persistence. Sometimes it looks like stubborn, unremarkable continuity. You walk forward again into the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The world hums louder now. Trains run. Telegraph wires stretch like veins across the land. Information moves faster than empathy. And still, there are places the noise doesn't fully reach. You come upon a Sami family preparing to move with the seasons. Reindeer are gathered. Supplies packed with practiced ease. Nothing about this looks dramatic. That's the point. They've done it this way for centuries. Here is the major historical fact: calm and unyielding. Despite intense pressure, many Sami communities continued traditional reindeer herding and seasonal migration well into the modern era. Adaptation without surrender. A woman secures a bundle with rope. Her movements are efficient, confident. She does not look like someone disappearing. She looks busy. The obscure cultural tidbit arrives gently here. Traditional Sami joik songs are not about things, they are the things. Person, an animal, place. You don't sing about them. You sing them into presence. Someone nearby says the songs sound strange. Another says they sound old. A third admits they're hard to forget once you hear them. That's joke one, accidentally true. A government official rides past, glances at the camp, keeps going. Paperwork doesn't always chase what it can't catch. That's joke two. Someone mutters that the North has always been stubborn. Joke three feels like a compliment pretending not to be one. Historians still debate how resistance should be defined, but surviving intact when the world wants you smaller is a form of defiance no banner can improve upon. You sit with the family as evening settles. A fire is lit. Stories are told softly. Children listen with the casual confidence of people who know where they belong, even if the world argues otherwise. For the first time in a long while, fear is absent from the room. Not because danger is gone, but because identity is still here. You feel sleep pressing gently now. Heavier, deeper, the kind that doesn't rush. And as your eyes close, one truth settles comfortably beside you. The Sami never needed to terrify anyone to endure. They only needed time. Recognition arrives late. It always does. You walk into the mid-20th century now, when the world is very proud of having learned lessons, even while still misunderstanding most of them. Wars have ended. Borders have shifted. New words like human rights circulate with optimism and uneven application. In the North, the land remains patient. You stand at the edge of a meeting hall where Sami leaders gather. Some in traditional dress, some in modern coats, some carefully balancing both. The air smells faintly of coffee and paper. This is not a dramatic revolution scene. There are no chants, no barricades, just talking. The major historical fact steps forward clearly, without raising its voice. In the latter half of the 20th century, Sami political movements formed to demand cultural recognition, land rights, and self-determination. It takes courage to ask politely for something you should already have. A speaker rises. He talks about language loss, about children who can no longer speak to their grandparents without translation, about land decisions made far away by people who have never felt this cold. His voice does not shake. That's intentional. The obscure cultural tidbit slips in through a side conversation. In some Sami regions, traditional handicrafts, duaji, became political symbols, worn deliberately during protests and meetings. If you can't raise a fist, you raise a pattern. Someone jokes quietly that politicians listen better when the room is quiet. Joke one, bitter but accurate. Another says the government promised to look into it. Joke two, a classic. A third notes that progress is happening, just slowly enough to be exhausting. Joke three lands with a sigh. Historians still debate which moment truly marked the turning point for Sami recognition. But for the people in this room, The shift feels less like a moment and more like a long, uphill walk taken without applause. Outside, the snow falls again. Always consistent. Always indifferent to policy. You feel the weight of waiting here. Waiting to be acknowledged. Waiting to be believed. Waiting to be allowed to continue doing what you never stopped doing. When the meeting ends, people leave quietly. No victory music. No defeat either. Just persistence. And strangely, that feels enough for now. Memory is a careful thing. It doesn't rush forward. It circles. It returns. You move closer to the present now. The landscape looks familiar in a modern way: roads, power lines, weather forecasts. But beneath it all, the older map still exists, etched into migration routes and seasonal knowledge. You visit a Sami cultural center. Shoes are removed at the door. The space is warm, wood-paneled, softly lit. Displays show photographs. Grandparents in black and white, children in color, both standing on the same ground. Here is the major historical fact, placed gently in your hands. Several Nordic countries formally recognized Sami people as indigenous in the late 20th century and established Sami parliaments. Recognition doesn't fix everything, but it does change the conversation. A guide explains how language revitalization programs work, how elders teach joik to children who once weren't allowed to sing it, how schools are slowly, cautiously becoming places of memory instead of erasure. The obscure cultural tidbit arrives with warmth this time. Some modern Sami artists blend joik with electronic music, creating songs that sound both ancient and futuristic. History, it turns out, can remix itself. Someone remarks that it's strange hearing old songs through speakers. Joke 1, affectionate disbelief. Another says the ancestors would probably complain about the bass. Joke 2 earns a smile. A third wonders if survival has always required adaptation, just with better lighting now. Joke 3 drifts off thoughtfully. Historians still debate how much restitution is possible, but survival isn't waiting for consensus. It's already happening. You step outside again. The air is clean, sharp, familiar. Somewhere in the distance, reindeer move, less numerous now but still present. The Vikings are long gone. Their fear has faded into footnotes and sagas. What remains is quieter and stronger. Continuity. As you walk, your pace slows. Your thoughts stretch out. The story doesn't end here. It just settles, like snow after a long fall. You feel that gentle pull toward sleep again. The kind that says, you've listened long enough. The land will keep speaking. Legacy is not loud. It does not announce itself with banners or trumpet calls. It lingers in habits, in muscle memory, in the way you instinctively turn your face away from the wind. You are walking again because in this story, walking is how you understand time. The path is modern now. Gravel mixed with tire tracks, the faint hum of distant infrastructure. And yet, the ground beneath your feet still belongs to older rhythms. Here comes the major historical fact, steady and unadorned. Despite centuries of pressure, Sami cultural practices, reindeer herding, joik, seasonal migration, have survived into the 21st century. Not preserved like insects in amber. Practiced, adjusted, lived. You meet a herder preparing for migration. His phone buzzes with weather updates. His hands still know the reins. He checks GPS coordinates, then glances at the sky anyway, because no app replaces intuition earned over generations. The obscure cultural tidbit slips in quietly. Some Sami herders still name individual reindeer, especially lead animals, recognizing personalities and temperaments. It's harder to exploit something once you've named it. He tells you the routes are narrower now. Development fences, roads, Power lines. He says it calmly, like someone listing the ingredients of a recipe he didn't choose. Joke 1 arrives gently. At least the reindeer don't need passports yet. Joke 2 follows. They'd probably lose them anyway. Joke 3 is unspoken, but it's there, hanging in the air. We're still here. Isn't that inconvenient? Historians still debate how much of Sammy's survival was resistance versus adaptation. But standing here watching preparation unfold, the distinction feels academic. The animals begin to move. Slowly, purposefully. The group forms a living shape like a thought organizing itself. You walk alongside them for a while. Your steps fall into rhythm. And for the first time in a long while, the world doesn't feel like it's rushing you anywhere. Stories eventually turn inward. They stop asking what happened and begin asking what remains. You sit by a fire now. Not a dramatic one. Just enough flame to warm hands and cast soft shadows. Someone pours coffee thick enough to qualify as a personality trait. The smoke drifts lazily upward, unconcerned with deadlines. The major historical fact settles beside you. Today, Sami communities continue to negotiate rights over land use, environmental protection, and cultural preservation across national borders. The struggle didn't end. It just learned new paperwork. A young person speaks about climate change, about unpredictable winters, ice that doesn't freeze when expected, snow that falls wrong. These details matter when your entire calendar depends on weather behaving like it used to. The obscure cultural tidbit arrives like a soft footnote. Traditional Sami calendars divided the year into up to 8 seasons instead of 4, based on ecological changes rather than dates. Nature never agreed to our math. Joke 1. The seasons didn't get the memo about modern scheduling. Joke 2. Neither did the weather. Joke 3. At least the reindeer are honest about it. Historians still debate how future pressures will reshape indigenous lifeways, but the people here are not waiting for conclusions. They are planning, teaching, singing, adjusting again. The fire crackles. Someone hums a joik, barely above a breath. Feels less like a performance and more like remembering out loud. You realize something then. The tribe that once terrified the Vikings did not do so because they were mysterious or supernatural or savage. They were terrifying because they could not be erased. And even now, especially now, that remains true. The warmth settles deeper into your bones. Your eyes grow heavy. The story loosens its grip, trusting you to carry what matters forward without effort. You don't need to stay awake for what comes next. The land will keep telling it. Night does not fall here so much as it arrives politely. It lowers itself into the landscape like a careful guest, dimming edges, softening contrasts, turning sharp ideas into silhouettes. You lie back, on packed earth, on old wood, on something that smells faintly of smoke and pine resin, and let the sky do what it has always done best. Remind you how small urgency really is. You can still hear the reindeer somewhere beyond the firelight. Their bells chime softly, not to signal danger, but to maintain togetherness. It's an ancient solution to a timeless problem, losing track of one another in the dark. Here comes the major historical fact, wrapped gently in night air. Sami oral traditions were historically discouraged and sometimes outright banned during periods of forced assimilation in the 18th to 20th centuries. Language was labeled primitive. Songs were called superstition. Stories were treated like obstacles to progress. And yet here you are, listening. The obscure cultural tidbit drifts in like smoke. Some joiks were traditionally composed for places, not people. Songs meant to remember a river bend, a hill, a migration stop. Imagine singing Google Maps into existence. Someone near you tells a story without raising their voice. It doesn't have a punchline. It doesn't even have a clear ending. It simply loops, revisits itself like a thought you fall asleep to halfway through and finish the next morning. Joke 1. Barely audible. This story makes more sense if you don't try too hard. Joke 2. Which, honestly, is good life advice. Joke 3. Especially after midnight. Historians still debate how much cultural knowledge was lost versus transformed during assimilation. But listening now, it feels less like disappearance and more like quiet survival, tucked into corners where authority forgot to look. The fire dims. Someone adds a log without ceremony. You remember the Vikings again, not as conquerors, but as people who also feared winter, also followed seasons, also told stories to make darkness manageable. Perhaps that shared understanding was the most unsettling thing of all. Sleep presses gently at the edges of your awareness. You let it. Morning here does not shout. It nudges. You wake to pale light filtering through cloud and canvas, frost whispering across surfaces, breath visible and unbothered by its own existence. The world looks rinsed, as if night ran a soft cloth over everything and left only what mattered. Movement begins slowly. Boots, hands, kettle. No alarms. No urgent scrolling. Just the quiet choreography of people who have done this before, many times in many versions of the same morning. The major historical fact arrives with the steam from your cup. In recent decades, Sami activism has led to increased recognition of indigenous rights, including language revitalization and political representation through Sami parliaments. Not perfect victories, not endings, but footholds. The obscure cultural tidbit warms alongside the fire. Traditional Sami clothing, gakti, often encodes information about region, family, and marital status through color and pattern. Fashion, but make it a census. A child laughs at a reindeer that refuses to cooperate with the concept of morning schedule. You relate deeply. Joke 1. Even animals hate mornings. Joke 2. Especially intelligent ones. Joke 3. Coffee remains undefeated. Historians still debate whether modern recognition efforts can truly undo centuries of marginalization, but watching language spoken freely, songs shared openly, you sense something rebuilding itself in real time. You walk again. The path curves past the place where you sat last night. The fire pit is cold now, but the shape remains. Memory leaves outlines. And then, almost without noticing, you feel the story beginning to loosen its hold. Not because it's ending, but because it trusts you now. You carry it differently, not as fear, not as legend, but as proof that endurance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Time stretches here in a way your body remembers but your calendar never learned. You move through a landscape that looks deceptively empty. Wide plains, distant hills, pale sky pressing low. But emptiness is an illusion created by impatience. Every dip in the land has a reason. Every pause in movement is a decision. You stop near a river that doesn't look important. No dramatic waterfall. No heroic bridge. Just water, moving like it has somewhere to be but no rush to arrive. The major historical fact settles in beside the current. Rivers and migration routes were central to Sami survival, shaping settlement patterns long before fixed borders existed. Before lines on maps, there were paths worn into memory. The obscure cultural tidbit drifts up with the cold air. In some Sami traditions, certain rivers were considered inappropriate to cross at specific times, not from superstition alone, but from careful observation of ice behavior and animal movement. Spiritual wisdom, backed by excellent risk assessment. You watch someone test the ice with a pole. Not once. Not twice. Again and again. No one mocks the caution. No one urges speed. Joke 1. The ice doesn't care about your confidence. Joke 2. Or your inspirational speeches. Joke 3. It prefers facts. Historians still debate how much environmental knowledge was lost during periods of forced relocation. But standing here, watching practiced movements, you realize how much knowledge lives in bodies, not books. You cross when it's time. Your steps are careful. Your breath steady. On the other side, nothing dramatic happens, which feels exactly right. Borders arrive quietly in stories like this. They do not announce themselves with walls at first. They show up as paperwork, as unfamiliar rules, as people telling you that the land you've always moved through now belongs to someone else, someone who has never slept here. You walk along an invisible line. One step here, another there. Nothing changes under your feet. The moss does not adjust its allegiance. The major historical fact unfolds without drama. Sapmi, the traditional Sami homeland, spans parts of modern-day Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. For countries, one way of life that never asked for division. The obscure cultural tidbit follows like a quiet aside. For generations, Sami families crossed these borders seasonally, often ignoring them entirely until enforcement made ignorance impossible. Maps are persuasive only when backed by consequences. You hear stories of permits denied, routes shortened, animals confused by fences that appear where none existed before. Joke 1. Dry as frost. The reindeer didn't get the memo about nation-states. Joke 2. Neither did the weather. Joke 3. History keeps insisting on being complicated. Historians still debate whether borders accelerated cultural loss or merely revealed existing pressures, but walking this line, you feel the absurdity of slicing a living system into administrative squares. You pause. Look back the way you came. Look forward. The land remains patient, and so do the people who know it best. You keep walking. Winter returns the way an old acquaintance does. Not with surprise, just inevitability. The light thins. The air sharpens. Sound carries farther, as if the cold has polished it. You pull your clothing closer, layers doing what layers have always done, compensating for human optimism. Movement slows, but thinking deepens. The major historical fact arrives bundled against the cold. For centuries, Sami winter dwellings, such as the Godi, were designed to conserve heat efficiently using wood, turf, and careful airflow. No excess, no wasted warmth. Architecture that understood weather as a collaborator, not an enemy. You step inside one now. Low ceiling, central fire, smoke slipping out through a hole above, like a thought you don't need anymore. The space feels intimate, but not cramped. It knows exactly how many people it was meant to hold. The obscure cultural tidbit curls up near the fire. Sleeping positions were often arranged according to age and role, with elders closest to warmth. Respect, measured in degrees Celsius. Joke 1. Hierarchy, but make it cozy. Joke 2. Power smells faintly of smoke. Joke 3. Still better than office politics. Historians still debate how much these dwellings changed over time versus remaining consistent, but your body understands the design instantly. Warmth rises. Cold stays low. Everyone survives another night. You lie down. Outside, the wind tests the structure. It does not win. Darkness stretches longer now. Not frightening, just thorough. You wake and sleep in cycles dictated by need rather than clocks. Dreams blur into waking thoughts. Someone hums while repairing gear. Someone else sharpens a tool slowly, deliberately, without any sense of hurry. The major historical fact arrives softly, like falling snow. Seasonal rhythm governs Sami life more than fixed schedules, with winter often reserved for maintenance, storytelling, and rest. Imagine that. A culture that planned for recovery. The obscure cultural tidbit slips in between breaths. During long winters, storytelling wasn't just entertainment. It was a way to pass down survival knowledge disguised as narrative. Once upon a time, but also, don't stand there when the ice cracks. Joke 1. The original educational podcasts. Joke 2. Zero ads. Joke 3. Very niche audience. Historians still debate how storytelling formats shifted under outside influence. But here, the stories continue, reshaping themselves like snowdrifts around familiar rocks. You listen without pressure to remember everything. The important parts stick on their own. Outside, the night deepens. Inside, the fire glows lower. Your breathing slows to match it. You are learning again without effort, and you don't mind at all. Spring does not rush its entrance. Tests the ground first. Sends a few cautious drips of meltwater. Loosens the grip of ice one knuckle at a time. You feel it in your knees before you see it in the light, an ancient forecast still accurate. You step outside and the air smells different. Damp. Awake. Like something remembering itself. The major historical fact arrives with the thaw. Spring migrations were among the most critical moments in Sami life, determining herd health, food supply, and community stability for the year ahead. Timing mattered. Leave too early, and the ice betrays you. Leave too late, and the animals weaken. This wasn't guesswork, it was generational calibration. The obscure cultural tidbit trickles in like meltwater. Certain Sami spring rituals involved deliberately quiet movement, minimizing noise so animals would not be startled during vulnerable periods. Respect practiced at a whisper. You watch preparations unfold. Harnesses checked. Paths discussed. Nothing hurried. Nothing wasted. The land decides the schedule and everyone listens. Joke 1. Nature runs the calendar. Joke 2. It does not accept rescheduling requests. Joke 3. Or excuses. Historians still debate how climate shifts altered these migration patterns over centuries, but standing here you see adaptability in motion, not nostalgia. The herd begins to move, and you move with it. Travel changes how you think. Thoughts stretch. Worries shrink. Repetition becomes comforting instead of dull. Step, breath, bell. Snow softened earth beneath your feet. You remember the river from earlier. You remember the fire pit. You remember the first night when the dark felt too wide. Now it feels familiar. The major historical fact arrives as the path curves. Sami navigation relied heavily on landmarks, stars, wind patterns, and snow conditions rather than fixed instruments. Orientation wasn't about precision, it was about relationship. The obscure cultural tidbit glides in gently. Some Sami languages contain dozens of words for snow, describing texture, density, and usability. Not poetic excess, practical necessity. You stop briefly. Someone points to a ridge barely noticeable to you, unmistakable to them. This way. Always this way. Joke 1. You'd still be checking your phone. Joke 2. There is no signal. Joke 3. The mountain is judging you. Historians still debate how much navigational knowledge can survive modernization, but watching this quiet competence, you suspect some skills simply wait until they're needed again. The path opens. The horizon widens. You feel lighter, not because the journey is ending, but because you finally understand its shape. You keep walking, unbothered. steady. The path narrows again, not because the land tightens, but because attention does. You notice smaller things now. Lichen patterns like pale handwriting on stone. The way wind schemes the snow without disturbing it, as if asking permission. You've learned, slowly, that endurance isn't a posture, it's a practice. The major historical fact arrives without ceremony. Across the 20th century, Sami communities organized transnational movements to defend land rights, language, and education, coordinating across borders that once tried to separate them. Resistance, but quiet. Advocacy, but patient. Meetings held in borrowed rooms. Letters written in careful hands. Progress measured in increments that don't photograph well. The obscure cultural tidbit slips in like a smile you almost miss. In some Sami communities, silence during decision-making is considered a sign of respect and careful thought, not disengagement. A meeting where the loudest voice loses. You sit in one such gathering. No raised hands. No clocks on the wall. The pauses stretch, then resolve. Someone speaks. Others nod. The decision lands like snow, soft, but unmistakable. Joke 1. This would terrify a modern agenda. Joke 2. No bullet points survived. Joke 3. Everyone lived. Historians still debate whether recognition will arrive in time to protect fragile ecosystems, but watching consensus take shape, you understand that speed was never the point. You stand again. The group disperses. The land remains. And you feel, oddly, at home in the quiet. Even long stories need somewhere to rest. You return to a familiar place. The river bend, the low hill, the shelter where warmth once gathered. Nothing dramatic waits for you. No final revelation. Just continuity, which turns out to be enough. The major historical fact settles like evening light. Today, Sami culture persists through education, art, herding, language revival, and modern adaptation. Alive, evolving, and self-defined. Not a museum exhibit. Not a footnote. A living thing that learned how to bend without breaking. The obscure cultural tidbit arrives as a final gift. Contemporary joiks are still composed today, new songs, old forms, present tense memory. The past humming forward. Joke 1. Barely there. Tradition updates itself. Joke 2. No restart required. Joke 3. Still no user manual. Historians still debate how history should be told, but here it doesn't argue. It breathes. And now, slowly, you let the story soften. The wind lowers its voice. The land grows dimmer at the edges, like a painting easing back into shadow. Your breathing lengthens, each exhale taking a little more of the day with it. Thoughts drift, untethered, no longer required to arrive anywhere. You imagine the reindeer bells fading into distance, not disappearing, just continuing somewhere else. You imagine fires being banked, songs settling into memory, paths remaining open for whoever needs them next. There is no rush to wake, no need to hold on to every detail. What mattered has already found its place. So you rest. The land keeps watch.